Hi, I'm Caitlin, and this is Book Chats, and today I'm going to talk about the 12th book I read for the 2016 Debut Author Challenge, which is The Crown's Game by Evelyn Skye. So, super exciting. This is the 12th book that I read for the challenge. The challenge requires you to read 12 books, and I am officially done having read this book, which is amazing because it's only June. I'm definitely not going to stop reading debut novels, but without further ado, I want to get into The Crown's Game by Evelyn Skye. So this book had a ton of buzz going in and was one that a lot of people were talking about, and so I was excited to kind of pick it up. But my summary, I actually have notes because my sister complained that my reviews were boring and unuseful. Boring and not useful. I kind of found this book to be not worth the hype, but still an enjoyable read. So reasons that it wasn't really worth the hype: it was pretty predictable and really cliched, and I did find it enjoyable. It was well written and the setting was good, but starting it was actually hard to get into because I was like, this is just like so every other thing I've read, and like specifically very derivative of a couple things that I've read and loved. But I still enjoyed it, and I don't think that Evelyn Skye was intentionally trying to be derivative. An enchanter that is chosen, there's only ever one enchanter. If there are two enchanters, the two enchanters have to compete to be the last enchanter standing in something called the Crown's Game. And so this book is about the competition between those two enchanters, one of whom is the best friend of the Tsar-to-be, and one of whom is a girl that both the other enchanter and the Tsarevich are in love with. Which tells you right there. What was really interesting to me is after I finished it, I really thought about it, and I wondered a lot if the things that felt so familiar and so old hat and so cliche, if they would have felt different if the book had been longer, and maybe if it had been an adult novel and not a YA book. I think partly because YA is usually shorter, this in particular kind of hewed as a debut to like a typical YA debut length. The story was really contained, and in this particular book's case, it felt like the story was flattened and more superficial because of the length, because there were several characters or situations that I think could have been more explored if the book were longer, but were not, and I would have really been interested in that. Something that was interesting and I wish had been explored more was the slightly younger but, world-weary and acts much older than her age sister of the Tsar-to-be. She was just very strategic, and she basically could have acted like she could have been the Tsar, and it would have been interesting to explore more kind of her motivations, where she was coming from, what motivated and drove her. And then also I really wish we had spent more time with the Tsar himself, seeing what his motivations were and making him less of this one-dimensional plot device that was basically, he existed to drive the plot of the Crown's Game along further, and I think he was supposed to create some kind of tension on timeline, but he didn't really. I don't know, I never really felt, even though at points characters die, it didn't feel like the stakes were ever really that high or that there was peril around the corner. I'm actually in the middle of reading Morning Star by Pierce Brown, but it's taken me a long time to read it because of anticipated peril. I'm for the characters all the time, and granted that's a third in a trilogy and this is the first book of who knows how many, but it never felt that for these characters. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, you can't read this book having read The Night Circus and not think of The Night Circus, because it is a poor shadow of The Night Circus. And one thing The Night Circus does very well is kind of weaves this tension in throughout the book, even though the things that are actually happening, the characters themselves, they're building these innocuous circus things, whereas in The Crown's Game, characters actually make attempts on each other's lives, but the tension isn't there. I don't know, I'm probably not explaining this well. I apologize, Renee. I took notes and now I'm off notes and I'm not even doing a good job explaining it. If this book were longer, maybe if it were an adult novel, would the author have felt the freedom to go into these things more? Would she have explored them more? Would she have explored the motivations? Would she have gone kind of George R. R. Martin style? And would that make it a better book? I don't know. It was a perfectly adequate and enjoyable book, but it was also derivative and unoriginal and not special. Like, if you want to read this book, you should read this book. If you really like reading things set in Tsarist Russia, you should read this book. If you want to read something that is vaguely reminiscent of the night circus but doesn't have the same kind of imagery and tension and world building as the night circus, read this book. But I would never go out of my way to recommend this to someone. Actually, I want to be really clear, I think this book was better written, but I felt very much like this book was the Red Queen of 2016 for me, in that it has a ton of buzz. I read it, and while I was reading it, especially once I got past the first hump, just like in Red Queen, I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but having finished it, I really have no desire to continue with the series. I don't feel like I need to. It felt well concluded enough. More concluded, in fact, than Red Queen. And I don't feel so attached to the characters that I care where they're going or what's happening to them. I don't want to belittle anyone who did enjoy this book, because I definitely think there's people out there who loved it. And I also want to be clear, like, I think that, like, the pacing isn't all over the place like in Red Queen. It is at least consistent, even if there's not a lot of tension. And overall, I think it was a better written book. And I think that the setting is very interesting, and that the author definitely knows a lot about kind of this time period in Russian history and kind of Russian novels. It just didn't connect to me in a way that made me care. I am curious to hear what you guys thought. I know a lot of people are reading this. I know that a lot of people loved it, and so people will probably disagree with me. And I welcome hearing what you guys loved about it. Please let me know, like, what helped you connect to the characters. One thing that would have been interesting to see would have been, so there's this like love connection between the magicians kind of thing going on, and in this it feels very superficial and very insta-lovey, and the guy does that stupid thing where he's like, I've loved you since the day I met you, I just didn't know it yet. And I'm like, no, you like loved her later, and you just retroactively dated it till then, and it wasn't love at first sight, and it wasn't insta-love. You just were pretending it was. But anyway, a bunch of the descriptions at certain points made me think, like, oh, is this really love, or is this the magic? Because their magic comes from the same, like, wellspring source. And so, like, is this really love, or is this the magic, like, calling to each other? And, like, it would be so interesting if the author had taken the time to explore that and to consider that and to go into that. And, like, if it is the magic is intrinsically part of them, then is it really love? But she didn't. And that was frustrating, and I wish she had gone into that, and I wish that she had just spent more time exploring these interesting themes that she didn't explore, and like the ideas of friendship and betrayal and love, like familial love and friendship love, and there was angles to explore different kinds of love in this, and then it wasn't. And it's, I guess, reading this book, I enjoyed it when I was reading it. I wouldn't discourage you from reading it if you're interested. I think you're welcome to read it. But to me, it's just so full of missed potential. And I think that's why I think of it the same way I think of Red Queen. Because I think Red Queen, too, felt like it was very much like missed potential. And so, in sum, The Crown's Game, cliched but enjoyable, missed potential. So much more superficial than it could have been. Thank you so much to all of you who have been watching these reviews. Let me know down below if you'd like me to continue reviewing all of the debuts that I read. I'll see you guys later. Thanks so much for watching this review. Bye!